Welcome everyone to Choice Conversations, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your life, one choice at a time. I'm your host, Chris Stefanik. Let's do this. Hey gang. I was recently a guest on the Tangent General podcast, and I'm replaying it for you here today. Well, sort of. Not exactly. I'm playing the interview that I had with Nick Ulbrick, host of the Tangent General podcast, but it's really quite unlike the Tangent General podcast itself if you go listen to that. So what I have here for you today is the interview raw in its full format. I'll break it into two parts, releasing part one today, and in a week I'm going to give you part two just because it was kind of long. But if you've ever listened to the Tangent General, you know what I'm talking about. It's not your normal podcast. Nick takes the time to take like segments of the interview and cut and slice and dice them with music and clips from other interviews. Like, you know, there's an example would be in this conversation, I was talking about the 4 stages of enlightenment from Daniel Mackler. And I'm like, yeah, blah, 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 4 stages of enlightenment from Daniel Mackler. And Nick, he cuts right into then a clip of Daniel Mackler talking about the 4 stages, right? And then it comes back to the interview with me, and then it goes into something else, and then it comes back to me, and it's all put together with music and done really elegantly. You know, it took Nick, he said 40 hours to edit my appearance on his show. So that alone, I was like, wow, that's quite the honor to be on a podcast where the person took 40 hours to edit it and put it together. You know, it's quite an honor to be on anybody's podcast, frankly, that someone would have you on. I'm always honored and so grateful whenever somebody does that. But this might be the podcast that I'm the most honored by. For one, the time he put into editing it, how cool the product is at the end once it's all sliced and diced and put together, really, really unique. And he was also very vulnerable and really opened up and told some stories about trauma that had happened to him and the like. So you can combine all that together. I might just be the most honored that I've been being on somebody else's show as I was for this one. So Nick, thank you so much. But because of that, you know, listen to this today, get the whole raw, uncut interview, but then go listen. I'm going to put links in the show notes. Click on those, listen to the Tangent General itself and hear that version of it, which is quite a bit different, you know, with all the other pieces slipped in there, you know, with it. So, and especially considering this topic, the topic today was music and healing trauma. So, you know, we talk a lot about music, but if you listen to Nick's version, he's actually, you know, sliding in clips of the music we're talking about. So that's kind of a cool way to do it. They're both interesting though. I think you'll like them both. I'd recommend listening to this today and listen to the Tangent General, which I'll have links in the show notes again. So I guess before I get into that, I did want to say that if you've been paying much attention, you've noticed I haven't been as consistent lately putting out episodes. I'm very sorry. I normally try to put out a podcast every week, but I've had some business ventures come up that are eating up my time, and so I've not been able to do that. I haven't forgot about you all. I do want to get back to putting out a podcast every week, but it's not going to happen quite yet. So it's going to take some time for me to handle these business propositions that I've got going on right now. And once those are handled, I hope to return to going out every week. But in the meantime, stay with me. I'll put out shows when I can. I won't completely abandon Choice Conversations. I won't completely abandon you all. I love you too much. So stick around, and there will definitely be more from me coming, including, I promise, I won't wait very long to put this part 2 of this out. Today's going to be part 1 of my discussion with Nick. A week from now, I'll put out part 2. So I will be sure to at least not wait too long between those. So anyways, enough about me yapping. Here's my discussion with Nick.
I guess the first thing then to kick it off, Chris, would be tell me a little bit about what you do with outside of the podcast in terms of working with people, what type of therapies that you've experimented with, I guess is the wrong term, but employed to varying degrees of success? And to what extent have you used music in your own practice?
Right. Sure. So I've tried a lot of things. I've been really into self-development, personal development, self-help kind of stuff for about the last 10 years, and have read, hundreds of books, listened to thousands of podcasts, and spent, probably thousands of hours working on myself for self-knowledge. And, I've found a lot of things that basically, my experience has been with reading all these self-help books is they all have a little something to offer. Some of them are much better than others, but you can get value out of almost any of them. But clearly some things work much better than others. So an example would be like affirmation. So one of the books I really like is The Power of the Subconscious Mind. And it's basically about positive thinking, and it's a book that came out a long time ago. I think like early 20th century. But there's a lot of things in there that it's basically the methods he describes are what we now would call affirmations.
Who's the author?
The Power of the Subconscious Mind by Joseph Murphy. So, and it talks a lot about the effects that your thoughts have and having positive thinking and how to encourage positive thinking and having a discipline for doing affirmations and the like. It's pretty powerful, but this was actually one of the examples I was going to give of you said like some things you've tried and the like, it only takes you so far. It really, it's not nearly as powerful as some of the other methodologies I've got out there, but I was referencing it because a lot of people have heard of affirmations and been like, you stand in front of a mirror and look at yourself and say, I am thin, or whatever. I am healthy. I am free of sickness. And the problem with it is there's a couple problems with it. One, it only works if you really believe it. So a lot of people will be sitting there saying, I am healthy, I'm free of sickness, but they're like, yeah, right. I'm not, there's a part of them that's not buying it. And it really only works if you believe it. And you may be asking me saying, well, that sounds kind of woo-woo. What do you mean this works? It's actually very scientifically proven that it works, just maybe in a different area. So the way it's scientifically proven is there's thousands of studies that show that placebos are effective. There are certain diseases that can be, healed that it's more effective than others. Some diseases, it has very little effect, but many diseases that have many. So it's, what is the placebo? It's just basically mind over matter, right? You believe something is a cure, so it becomes a cure. So in this manner, like faith healings will work. Praying for people, if you pray for somebody that's sick and they don't know that you're praying for them, it has no effect. But if they know you're praying for them, or even if you're not praying for them, but you tell the person, people are praying for you, and there's somebody that believes that has an effect, it can have a real effect. It can help them to heal. But it's just the subconscious mind. So this methodology of using affirmations, it is a tool, and it's one I still use. It's one that can be very helpful in certain situations, but it's not nearly as powerful as some of the other ones, and it's not really where I spend my time with my clients. So when I've looked through the various things that I've tried, and what I came down to being the most successful at changing my own life, and being the one thing that I quickly discovered was the biggest value add I had for my clients, because I could help them out with setting up daily practices of meditation and affirmations and helping them out with their diet and all this stuff. There was a lot of knowledge things I could give them, like here's some knowledge about how to live a good life and how to, have harmony and all these things. What I found was the knowledge wasn't nearly as valuable to them as giving them the ability to follow that knowledge, because knowledge is so easy to get these days. It's a Google search away, right? There's all this knowledge out there. Most of the time, people's issues are not one of lack of knowledge. They know what it is they're supposed to be doing. They know if they want to lose weight that they shouldn't eat a big bowl of ice cream. It's the ability to not eat that ice cream that they're lacking, right? So the things that I've found, the practices that I've found that have been most effective for attacking that ability, for getting to that issue of self-sabotage I was talking about, there's really two of them, and I use them together. One is a therapy that's called interfamily systems therapy. You'll hear that referred to as IFS. And the other is, there's not an official name for it out there. I found it in the works of Don Miguel Ruiz, who wrote the bestseller, The Four Agreements. I've found it expanded upon in the works of Gary Van Warmerdam, who's like a Don Miguel Ruiz disciple. And I call it beliefs work. And it's what it is getting to your core beliefs. So basically, anytime you have a strong emotional reaction to something, at the subconscious level, you're like, oh, my wife is always nagging me. She's always on my ass. She's a bitch. So the subconscious level is like, you're angry. I'm sorry. At the conscious level, you're angry because you think your wife is a bitch. But that's like a surface layer. That's like the leaf of a tree, right? And you want to get to the roots. And you've got a long way to go. There's many beliefs underneath that if you dig into it. So once you start digging into it, you might find out that, and this is a real world example that I've seen, where you start digging beneath it, and the reason you're getting angry is because you feel like, they felt like their wife was disrespecting them. But then that still wasn't at the root level. The beneath that was a belief that respect, it was important to be respected, and another belief being that you're not a man if people don't respect you, or especially if your wife doesn't respect you. And then beneath that was you're not good enough. So it was really, and that's a lot of these issues, when you dig down deep enough, that's a common one that you'll see is a belief that I'm not good enough, is a common belief that's beneath all this self-sabotage. And to getting to that and recognizing it for one, and then dismantling it, which is a long process because this is a deep-seated belief that has been, that pathway has been worn deep in your mind, and to kind of make a new path is going to require a lot of efforts, to form the new neural pathways and get it so that you don't just by default think these things. But getting to those beliefs and changing them and saying, what, I inherited all these beliefs from my surroundings before, when, it's started when I was a child, and from my caregivers, and just the world around me has been setting up conditions where certain beliefs formed in my subconscious mind, and they've been behind my life to this point. They've been behind the paths I've chosen, the thoughts I think, the actions I take. But I didn't actually choose those. I never looked at them and said, do I want to hold that as one of my beliefs? Do I, first of all, I always ask, when we get to a belief, I ask, is it true? And then two, does that belief serve you? And if both of those things are not true, then in my opinion, you would benefit from dismantling that belief and replacing it with one that is true and that does serve you. So that's kind of a high level of the things I work on predominantly with my clients is, looking at doing IFS therapy, which we could go into more details about that if you'd like. And then doing this, what I call beliefs work, which is choosing what you want your core beliefs to be, rather than having just kind of inherited them and letting them, walking through your life without even realizing what your core beliefs are.
So in regard to IFS therapy, I think, did you do an episode of School Sucks with Brett Bernard on that topic?
I did not do one with him on it, but I believe Brett has talked about it before. I know in the libertarian, anarchist, voluntarist community, IFS is one that's come up several times. I think it's actually where I first heard about it was, Stefan Molyneux from Free Domain Radio. He's talked a lot about, before he was a podcaster, that he spent a lot of time in therapy and got his shit together. And, he is very big proponent of recommending therapy to people. It's one of the few things I still agree with Stefan. He's not wrong on everything, but he's got some really good things he's promoted as well. But he said that, the methodology of therapy that I went to, the counseling and the like, was IFS therapy. And so because he's so prominent in that community, a lot of people have heard of it and a lot of people have looked into it. And I'm 98% sure that Brett at some point has done some shows on IFS therapy, but not with me. Okay.
That's okay. We may, as the conversation rolls on, get more into that. Now, core beliefs. So the one question that you didn't answer in all of that is music and how you use music in your therapy. I guess I'll just ask you in a sort of point blank way. Do you use music at all when you're helping people?
I've not, and that's a really interesting question. And I will say I've used it for myself, and I'll talk about that, and then we can go from there. But I've not used it with other people. So the areas where I've used music in my own work, my own self-knowledge work and the like, is there will be times when I'm really upset about something. Maybe I'm upset with somebody at work, and it wouldn't be appropriate to, in my opinion, it would be maybe inappropriate is not the right word, but it certainly would be not to my benefit to engage with them at that time until I've calmed down. Or maybe a family member, maybe I'm upset with my wife or my daughter or something like that. And I found as a musician that when I get with my instrument, and especially if I'm playing something that's challenging to me, there's really not room in my mind for anything else. I become focused on it in the flow, and everything else kind of melts away. The tension just is gone, and it's just me and my guitar. And it's not unique to music. This is really anything where you can really focus your mind and get in a flow can have the same kind of effect. Like I know rock climbers, for example, will say, when they're up on that wall, it's just them and that wall, and the rest of the world doesn't exist. And it's really a relief to have whatever else baggage you came in, before you came into the gym and looked at, started climbing that wall, or before you sat down with your instrument and started playing, you're taking in all this baggage with you, and your mind's going in 1,000 different directions. And it's just such a relief just to focus the mind and quiet the mind and get it just on one thing. And in that regard, it's similar to meditation. Meditation, I've heard some people define meditation as focusing the mind. And so as a tool for stress relief, music, at least as a musician, it can be something that you do to relieve stress when you're in a stress, rather than just sitting there and either going to, having that confrontation with your wife that afterwards you regret it, because you said things you didn't wish you hadn't said and that sort of thing. And even if you don't have you're smart enough to realize, or smart enough is probably not the right way to say it. It's more like, in control of your emotions enough, because it's not necessarily an intelligence, or maybe what you would more call an emotional intelligence. If you've got the emotional intelligence enough to realize that it's not good to go in front of your significant other in this moment. If you still don't find some other way to calm down, your mind's still going to be going. You're going to be rehashing the arguments in your mind. You're going to be having the argument that you would have had with your spouse in your mind. Maybe you're not having it with them, and there's some benefit to that, but you're having it with them in your mind over and over and over again, and it's still causing you a lot of stress. So as a tool for stress relief, I think it can be very powerful. Now, in the moment when you just need a relief from that stress, absolutely do stuff like this that's like distracts you from it. I'm all about that. Do whatever you could take to distract you from it. But what I teach to my clients and what I've learned for myself is you're much better in the long run. What you really want to do is look at those points in your life that are causing you stress and solve that problem. So if you've got something like maybe you've got a job that's stressing you out, you need to look long and hard at that and say, do I want to stay at this job? First, I guess the first question you ask is, is there anything I can do to make this job less stressful? And if there's not, what are my options for getting a different job or, getting out of that, changing my situation? Because that's going to do much more for your long-term holistic health than distracting yourself from the stress. I mean, there's a good place for distracting yourself from the stress. There's a good place in your tool belt for that tool, but it's just one tool of many, and it's not the most effective at dealing with stressful situations. So does that make sense to you?
Oh, absolutely. I think, though, that there are things that can occur in our lives that are stresses, and stress is such a big word. I mean, stress could be adrenaline, cortisol, or it could be a more long-term insecurity, anxiety. It could be even more long-term in terms of depression, chronic depression, and then right down to the point of suicidal ideation, things like that. And there, along that, if we think of that as kind of a slide, like at a playground or something, along that slide, there are points where you can either decelerate or accelerate the velocity. So what I mean by that is drugs, alcohol, sex, violence, other forms of like dangerous escapism, things like riding a motorcycle at very high speed in an unsafe way, such as on a public road. There's many more examples that we could list off. Going back to the casino of Facebook, to get to the root, to get to those core beliefs is something that definitely we won't be doing in this show, but it isn't something that you can do in an hour. It isn't something that you can probably do in 10 hours to really... I'm not talking in a coaching scenario now. I'm talking in a introspective kind of way. I think there's something about music, especially because of the memory aspect of music, like the first time you heard a song, it can lock a time period for you, and then that can give you access that you otherwise wouldn't have to sort of go back and dwell in the moment when that stimulus first came on, when you were first going down that slide.
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I know when I'm doing IFS work with people, I will have them try to remember situations, like remember what it felt like when this happened. And once that happens, it helps me to work with them to access that part of their subconscious mind that we're going to deal with that day. And as you're saying this, I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, that could be another way to help access that. Was there a song that you remember associated with it? Was there a smell? If so, like think of that song, think of that smell, or whatever, and just another way to help bring them into that moment, feel what it was they were feeling then, and then we've kind of unlocked the door to that part of their mind that we can now take the next steps in IFS therapy. So I'm going to remember that and have to try that. Now, another thing that occurred to me while you were talking is that music can be really cathartic. You can have an emotional release where, and I'm looking at this from like a musician's point of view, and it's maybe a little different if you're just somebody who enjoys listening to music. But I think it can have some benefits as well, even there. But it could be music, like writing music can be cathartic. I could see that where, I've had some examples of that where I've had songs that I've written about my childhood trauma. And, when I'm performing them, I'm like, brought to tears. But it's kind of it's a good feeling. It's that, it's that getting it off my shoulders, expressing it. It's rather than burying it and having it still be that puppet master, right? That's controlling my life behind the scenes. I bring it out in the open, feel those feelings that instead of repressing them, and then it allows me to heal and move forward. You know, so that's a lot of people get into to trouble by these painful memories and the like. They want to sweep them under the rug and not address them. They don't want to look at them. They suppress them. They want, another way of saying that is they dissociate from them. And it's very unhealthy. And the problem with dissociating from trauma is then it's got you. Then it controls you. You feel like you're above it. Like, oh, I don't even, you know, yeah, I had a rough childhood, but you know, everybody has problems in their childhood, and some people just suck it up and others sit there and complain about it. I've grown up and I've put that behind me. And meanwhile, that person's saying this and they've not done any kind of work, and they've really just dissociated from it. They've just kind of buried it, and they're like, I'm not going to deal with it. And what happens is it becomes the puppet master of their life. It's sitting there behind all their choices. There's a string being pulled, and they're letting it control them. So that's where, you know, another way that music could be used is to help you feel these repressed feelings and release them. And I imagine you might be able to do that as well. I could see scenarios where you could do that as well, not just as a musician, but as somebody that's just a consumer of music, listening to a piece that's really moving, and allow yourself to feel those feelings, allowing the music to help draw the emotions out of you.
So that's an interesting segue, and I'm going to take advantage of it and talk for a moment about Audioslave and their song Like a Stone, because I think in my personal life I can attest to this with that song. And of course, unfortunately, last year we lost Chris Cornell to suicide, but that also plays into my story of personal trauma. So we'll go back. So I was born in 1987, which makes me nearly 31 now. I was born on Valpurgis night, 1987. And we'll rewind the tape to 2003, and then we'll dig a little deeper after that. So in 2003, I had my first part-time job, and I was working for one of the big fast food chains. Not the biggest one, but one of them. And I would do the late shift. So, and this would be during the week. And so one of the things is that you'd be cleaning the restaurant after it closed, and you know that it might not close till 10 p.m. and you'd be there till like half midnight, 1 a.m. and then you'd have to get home. So, you know, it wouldn't be unusual for me to get home at like 2 in the morning. And I quite liked that back in 2003, that idea of the day is where all the people are and all the sort of pseudo business is. Like, I was a teenager then, and I had a great disdain for the business of adults. I thought it was all phony, in the words of this show's hero, Holden Caulfield. And it's probably around this time that I actually read Catcher in the Rye for the first time as well. But I preferred the night. I felt that there was more atmosphere to breathe at night. So, and some nights I would skip sleep altogether. And maybe this is a part of the notion of solipsism, like wanting to be in a situation where I am not distracted by other people, but also where I don't have to be in an environment where other people even exist, so to speak. But what I want to highlight, Chris, is that by myself, alone at night, I was able to discover ways to channel a deep, yearning sense of pain that would exist in the deep, in the pit of my stomach. You know, and this could come from stupid things like watching Texas Walker Ranger. It could come from more serious things like writing in my journal, using the internet to expose myself to various forms of art and music that I hadn't heard before. But in 2003, we got basic cable for the first time. And like I said, it wouldn't be unusual for me to get home at 2 a.m. So I got home, I was dropped off, I got home at 2 a.m. Everyone else in the house was already asleep. And I needed some downtime. So I put the TV on in the lounge room. And, get about 3 hours sleep before I had to wake up and rinse and repeat for the public school cycle. But that's another story. And I'm watching TV. It's a dark atmosphere, obviously. I'm watching TV, and this is the very first time for me to be introduced to the explosive track by Audioslave, Like a Stone, and the beautiful talent of Chris Cornell. Now, for me, Cornell epitomized, especially at that moment, even though, during the day and talking to my schoolmates about the music of Chris Cornell and trying to express to them how it touched me in the sense of it enabled me to dwell in that moment of pain without having to articulate it in words or even to some extent images. It was just the complexity of the music, the performance and the production, that emergent quality that is the finished product allowed me to be in that moment to process the pain without having to actually be in the isolation of reliving it directly. And so obviously my schoolmates had no idea what I was talking about. I mean, I was in year 7 or year 8, one of the only kids whose parents were divorced, which was quite unusual. In primary school, most parents were divorced, but in high school it was kind of the opposite. And so that was an interesting aspect as well. It was kind of like my relationship with Chris Cornell was my own relationship, even though other students liked him and even though other students bought the album before I ever did, it was still kind of my own relationship. And this wasn't the first time that I'd had my own almost one-on-one relationship with a performing artist, but certainly there were things about it that I felt that were not able to be articulated well with my social group, which was interesting. Now, pain is certainly not a virtue, and it's not weakness simply leaving your body. If you think about like the idea of no pain, no gain, and I also would say that it's not a place to dwell for very long periods of time. In fact, what I would say is that pain is dangerous and vicious, and there's an element of self-indulgence that goes along with experiencing pain. At the same time, it's unavoidable. And to go back to the gym metaphor, you're not going to. It's almost true that there is no gain without the pain, but where the gain comes from is pushing through the pain. So I'll kind of maybe fast forward a little bit through this, but if we ever love, we love through pain, and especially if you've ever had unrequited love. And unfortunately, I have had that kind of misplaced desire for intimacy projected onto other people, and then them having no idea that I've done that, and no real line of communication being open properly, so that either they don't know I exist, or they do know I exist and they think that I'm a creep or, a stalker or whatever. But as an artist, I think that there's a sensitivity to pain that artists feel that others don't. And I think to some extent, this is where, the suicide of Chris Cornell kind of sadly bookends the 14 years between when that song was released, when I first heard it, and last year when he did commit suicide. So that's quite a traumatic thing for me as a spectator on the outside at a meta level, let alone the kind of respect and the bafflement that, given how incredibly successful he was and all the rest of it, the question is why? Why did he do that,
Right. Right. Yeah, it's sad that people, so many people are in pain like that. And it just goes to show that money, fame, and success are not ways to get happiness. That really is not where happiness comes from. I know they've done studies on money, for example, and they found that basically once you have food on your table, a roof over your head, clothes on your back, that sort of thing, once you've got the basic necessities taken care of, that there's no correlation between happiness and money. Now, if you don't have those things, money will absolutely make you happier. They have found that but the thing is that in our modern world, especially in the West, with welfare and the things of that nature, almost nobody doesn't have the basic necessities at this point, right? So the only ones that don't, like homeless people, are generally either they're mentally ill or they voluntarily are homeless. They choose to be homeless. They don't have to be. They just choose.
I think we have to be a little bit careful about let's call it those suffering housing insecurities. And I'm not trying to be politically correct there, Chris, but just that's my area of study for my PhD.
Really?
And
interesting.
I think that there is a lot more going on in homelessness is an outcome, right?
Mm-hmm, sure.
No one's born into homelessness, and I don't think anybody actively, it wouldn't be their first choice. Let's put it that way. So to that extent, I just wanted to put a little caution there, not to censor you or anything, but just in the sense of wanting to broaden the scope a little bit on that topic.
Right. Yeah. I don't mean to take us down that tangent, but thank you for that feedback. And
you're on the Tangent General show, so it doesn't matter what tangents we go down.
Right. But thank you for sharing your experience with Chris Cornell and Audioslave and the like. I actually first discovered Chris Cornell in the early 90s with Soundgarden, and I'm a bigger fan of his work with Soundgarden than I am of Audioslave, although the Audioslave stuff is good as well. And I'm trying to think, I know I saw Soundgarden in concert. I believe it was back, I want to say it was at one of the Lollapaloozas in the 90s, if memory serves. But I'm kind of foggy on the memory of that. But you had talked about how pain is something that you need to feel in order to have growth. And it's really true. So it's back to, I mentioned before, dissociation. One of the therapists that I'm a huge fan of, and he's been a guest on my show, is Daniel Mackler. And he's the first person I've heard talk about this, but he talks about the 4 stages of enlightenment. And the very first stage, the lowest stage of enlightenment, is dissociation. And this is where you refuse to deal with your pain. So this is where, in my experience, the majority of people are in this stage of dissociation. So they're wanting to escape their pain. So a lot of times this takes the form of addiction. So it could be, the obvious addictions of drugs and alcohol, but, and sex and porn and gambling and things of that nature. But other ones that are socially accepted forms of addiction. So this would be like being a work addict. People can be very successful because they're a work addict, but they're doing it to escape their pain. Maybe that's what was going on with Chris Cornell. He was really throwing himself into work and wasn't dealing with his pain, and just was never enough to make him happy. I know Alanis Morissette talks about this a lot on her podcast, where she was really work addicted, and it's something, she still struggles with to an extent, but has put in a lot of work.
Well, it's very. I don't mean to cut you off, Chris, but I just want to pick up on the synchronicity there, because I don't think I've brought up Alanis Morissette yet in the conversation. So I think you're the first to bring it up. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
All right. So I'll let you sort of. I'm gonna let you finish, but first I just want to give a shout out to Beyonce. No, what I was going to say is I will let you finish, but I just want to point out the synchronicity because I'm going to go back to my story in a minute, and Alanis Morissette is going to play a huge role because her album Jagged Little Pill came out in 1995, and that was the year my parents first separated, and then her album Supposed Former Infatuation Junkie came out in 1997, and that was the year that my parents separated for good. And when I talk about those relationships with performing artists that have the ability to touch me in a very sort of personal way, Alanis Morissette is definitely one of those, with songs like Perfect, Right Through You, Not the Doctor, and then obviously her hits, not so much Thank You, but, there are a few. She was, for probably a good 6 years, my absolute favorite artist.
Wow.
So I just think that's very interesting that you sort of brought her up without me bringing her up.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, Alanis, she really takes me back to my college years. I was in college in 1995, and specifically some certain friends that I was hanging out with at that time that were, really big fans of hers. So I've always liked the song Head Over Feet. I've always thought, like, that's what I want the person who loves me to write. I want them to write that song to me. I've always felt like, I'm like, man, to have somebody write a song like that to me would be, that's kind of like the Western ideal, I guess. But for whatever reason, it really speaks to, there's, a million love songs out there, but that one really speaks to me and kind of warms my heart. But yeah, and Alanis's podcast, I think it's Conversations with Alanis or something like that. I'm sure if you just look for Alanis Morissette podcast, you'll find it. She goes into this a lot about how she was really wrapped up in dissociating. She might not use that term, but basically in her work addiction, and wasn't dealing with her pain and was never happy. And that's, when you look at the 4 stages of enlightenment that Daniel Mackler lays out, stage 1, dissociation, running from your pain, hiding from your pain, distracting yourself from your pain. Stage 2 is what he calls depression. And this is basically allowing yourself to actually feel the pain. You still don't have any answers, and you might be miserable, but you're now feeling your pain. And the interesting thing about this is that people that are in stage 2, in the depression stage, they look like they're a lot worse off than the people that are in stage 1, dissociation. People in stage 1 are looking at the people in stage 2 and being like, man, they really don't have their shit together. Wow. They're in a lot of pain or whatever, and I feel sorry for them. But the interesting thing is even though they have the appearance of being worse off, they're actually at a higher stage of enlightenment. And sadly enough, a lot of the psychology and especially psychiatry industry is all about taking people from stage 2 and putting them back in stage 1. Let's not deal with the pain. Let's get, and that's what that's what a lot of people want. They're like, they go to see a psychiatrist and they're like, can you just give me a pill? I just want a pill that'll help me distract me from this so I can go back into stage 1. They're obviously not using those terms, but that's basically what they're doing. They're saying, just give me a pill to take away the pain, doc. But where the real enlightenment comes is then when you go into stage 3 and stage 4, where you're now processing the pain and healing and getting on. So, stage 3, Mackler, he calls that grieving. And this is where it's kind of like what we were talking about where, in music, it can be a cathartic release. as you allow yourself to feel the pain and then you feel better afterwards. That's basically what grieving is. Grieving is you allowing yourself to feel the pain so you can get closure and move on. And, it's not the only way to get past childhood trauma. It's one in the work that I do with my clients. That's like the one step in the process of healing that, but it's a very important step to allow yourself to feel that pain so you can move on from it. Feel it, acknowledge it, and then, okay, how can we move on from this? So that's when I look at what's going on with like an artist like Chris Cornell or, Robin Williams, or just on and on, all these people who've taken their lives. Money doesn't buy you happiness, and money, success, all these things do not bring you happiness. And it's unfortunate that it's not more well known that there is actually a blueprint to get past your pain and to find happiness and to find peace and harmony and contentment. And it's not throwing yourself into your work. It's not seeking, to add another zero to your bank account.
I think there's something about like integrity, holistic. That word comes to mind when we're at this point of the conversation. I think fulfillment as well, but not fulfillment in the sense like a workaholic could have a sense of fulfillment, but it's almost like fulfillment of your will, and not willpower, but like the Nietzschean will, like, or the Aleister Crowley, do what they will. Like, who are you really? When the makeup is off, when the mask slips down, when you're naked in front of the mirror, who are you? That's sort of what I mean, like fulfillment of that. And there are many shiny objects along the road that can distract us from the journey of that fulfillment and then trap us into the illusion that we won't die. But the reality is we all die, and you can't take the money with you.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Check back next week to hear part 2. Go over to tangentgeneral.com. Check out Nick's website, Nick's podcast. Check out these specific versions of this podcast. Like I said, it's pretty cool to check out this version of the podcast once it's sliced and diced and with clips of music added in and all of that. I really enjoyed listening to it. Go ahead and click on those links in the show notes to give it a listen. If you would like some coaching from me to help you heal trauma, email me at chris@choiceconversations.com. I can definitely help you out, and I would love to do that. Again, it's chris@choiceconversations.com, all lowercase. All right, so take care of yourself. And remember, make the choice to be great.